Monsters rarely announce themselves early. Sometimes they smile, sometimes they inherit billions, and sometimes they spend decades hiding in plain sight. The tape began with breathing, not words, not screaming, just breathing, slow, uneven, terrified. The detective listening to it would later say the sound haunted him more than any murder scene he had ever witnessed. Because somewhere in that darkness, someone was trying very hard not to die. Then came the voice. Soft, cold, almost calm. "Stop crying." A woman whispered something too distorted to understand. Then a loud crash echoed through the recording. Silence. And finally one chilling sentence. "Look what you made me do." For nearly 40 years, the world believed Kathleen McCormick Durst disappeared without a trace. No body. No murder weapon. No confession, just rumors. But hidden inside a forgotten storage unit in Texas, investigators may have uncovered something far worse than murder. Evidence that Kathleen may have survived? And if that was true, then one of America's richest heirs had potentially hidden a living woman from the world for years. This is the story of Robert Durst, the billionaire heir surrounded by death, the man who repeatedly escaped consequences, and the terrifying mystery that may still not be over. New York City in the 1950s was a monument to money. Towering steel buildings, private clubs, penthouse apartments glowing above Manhattan, and among the families quietly shaping the city from behind closed doors, none carried more influence than the Dursts. The Durst organization was already becoming one of the most powerful real estate empires in America. Their name opened doors, protected reputations, controlled fortunes. Robert Durst was born directly into that world. Luxury surrounded him from the beginning. Private schools, expensive suits, drivers waiting outside buildings, family dinners attended by powerful men. To outsiders, the Dursts looked untouchable. But inside the home, something felt wrong. Years later, people who knew Robert described him as emotionally distant, quiet, observant, like someone standing outside humanity, carefully studying it. Then tragedy struck. When Robert was just 7 years old, his mother Bernice died after falling from the roof of the family home. Some reports claimed Robert witnessed the fall. Others disputed the story. But regardless of what truly happened that day, investigators and psychologists would later wonder if the trauma permanently changed him. Because after that moment, people close to Robert noticed something unsettling. He rarely showed emotion, not genuine emotion, even during moments that should have devastated him. One acquaintance later described talking to Robert as like speaking to someone pretending to be human. At first, nobody imagined the strange heir would someday become one of the most infamous figures in modern true crime. Kathleen McCormick was alive in ways Robert Durst never seemed to be. She laughed loudly, worked long hours, had ambitions beyond wealth. Friends remembered her energy, her warmth, the way she could dominate a room without trying. She met Robert in the early 1970s. At first, the relationship appeared unconventional but exciting. The wealthy heir and the hard-working young woman. But over time, cracks began appearing. Then the cracks became fear. Kathleen reportedly told friends Robert could become controlling, volatile, unpredictable. Some claim she showed up with bruises. Others remembered late-night phone calls filled with panic. By the early 1980s, Kathleen was preparing to leave him. And according to several people close to her, Robert knew it. She had begun discussing divorce, not quietly, not eventually, immediately. Friends later said she feared Robert was capable of violence. Then came January 31st, 1982. On the final night anyone could definitively place Kathleen alive. Robert claimed he drove her to the train station after they spent the weekend together. According to him, she boarded the train and vanished into New York City. But almost immediately, the story began unraveling. Kathleen never returned to work, never contacted her family, never used her credit cards, never touched her bank account. It was as though she had been erased. Friends knew something was wrong instantly. Kathleen was not the kind of woman who disappeared voluntarily. Police interviewed Robert. He remained calm, collected, almost detached. And despite growing suspicions, investigators lacked the one thing they desperately needed: a body. Without physical evidence, the case slowly drifted into limbo. But privately, many detectives believed the same thing. Kathleen Durst had not disappeared. She had been silenced. And somehow, the wealthy heir walked away untouched. For years, Robert Durst seemed to move through life untouched by consequences, even after his wife vanished, even as rumors spread, even as investigators quietly watched him. Then another death changed everything. Susan Berman was smart, sharp, charismatic, a journalist raised in a Las Vegas mob-connected family. She and Robert shared a strange friendship built on secrets and loyalty. But investigators eventually began suspecting Susan knew more about Kathleen's disappearance than she admitted. According to authorities, Susan may have helped Robert create a false alibi years earlier. Then in December 2000, just before police planned to question her again, Susan Berman was found dead inside her Los Angeles home, execution style, one gunshot to the back of the head. The murder looked personal, precise, professional. And then came the letter. Before news outlets publicly announced the murder, the Beverly Hills Police Department received an anonymous note. It read, "Cadaver Beverly Hills." One word immediately caught investigators' attention: cadaver, misspelled. Exactly the same way Robert Durst had misspelled it years earlier. Suddenly, detectives believed they finally had something tangible connecting him to murder. But once again, Robert Durst slipped away. No arrest, no conviction. Just another dead person orbiting the same strange billionaire. And another mystery buried beneath money, lawyers, and silence. By the early 2000s, Robert Durst was no longer merely eccentric. He was becoming ghost-like, paranoid, reclusive, unpredictable. Then investigators discovered something almost absurd. The billionaire heir had disappeared into Texas disguised as a mute woman. He wore wigs, baggy clothing, dark glasses, a millionaire hiding inside cheap apartments while pretending not to speak. The image sounded ridiculous, until another body appeared. Morris Black was Robert's elderly neighbor in Galveston. The two men developed an uneasy friendship. Then Black vanished. Days later, fishermen discovered garbage bags floating in Galveston Bay. Inside were human remains, dismembered, cut apart with horrifying precision. The body belonged to Morris Black. When police arrested Robert Durst, he admitted to dismembering the corpse. But his explanation stunned the nation. He claimed self-defense. According to Robert, Black attacked him. A gun accidentally fired, and panic drove him to cut apart the body. The story sounded impossible. Yet during trial, prosecutors struggled to prove intentional murder. And in one of the most shocking courtroom outcomes in modern true crime, Robert Durst was acquitted. A man who admitted cutting up a corpse walked free again. For many Americans watching the case unfold, the verdict felt unreal, as though wealth itself had become a shield against reality. And perhaps most disturbing of all, Robert barely seemed emotional during the trial. No visible grief, no outrage, no horror. Just the same detached calmness investigators had noticed for decades. The calmness of a man who always believed he would survive. For years, Robert Durst escaped consequences, until when he was 69 years old, going to 70 years. Then filmmakers entered the story. What began as a documentary investigation slowly evolved into something much darker. The project became HBO's The Jinx. The filmmakers uncovered contradictions in Robert's stories, handwriting similarities, missing details, disturbing timelines. And strangely, Robert agreed to participate. Viewers watching the interviews noticed the same unsettling quality investigators had described for years. Robert often spoke calmly while discussing horrifying subjects. At times, he even appeared amused. Then came the bathroom recording. The moment that transformed the documentary into cultural history. During filming, Robert entered a restroom while still wearing his microphone. He apparently believed it had been turned off. It wasn't. What happened next sounded less like a confession and more like a man unraveling alone with his thoughts. There it is. You're caught. What the hell did I do? Then the sentence heard around the world. Killed them all, of course. The audio stunned audiences. Because for the first time, Robert Durst sounded afraid. Not of prison, not of investigators, but of himself. As though decades of buried violence had finally surfaced in one unguarded moment. Shortly before the documentary finale aired, authorities arrested Robert in New Orleans. After decades of suspicion, the walls finally seemed to close in. But the deeper investigators looked, the stranger the story became. Because hidden beneath the murders was another question, one far more disturbing. What if Kathleen Durst had survived longer than anyone imagined? 3 weeks after Robert Durst died in prison, retired homicide detective Frank Delaney received a package. No return address, no fingerprints, only a faded shipping label and one word written across the cardboard, Kathleen. Delaney stared at the box for nearly a minute before opening it. The case had haunted him for decades. He had once worked the disappearance during the early years of the investigation, and despite retirement, he never truly let it go. Inside the box were photographs, dozens of them. Most appeared ordinary: a dinner, a roadside motel, a gas station somewhere in the Southwest. But the final photograph made Delaney's stomach tighten. It showed a woman sitting alone at a dinner counter in New Mexico. The photo was dated 1994. Dark hair, nervous eyes, a scar near her wrist. She looked older, thinner, exhausted, but Delaney immediately recognized her. Kathleen McCormick Durst, alive. 12 years after she officially disappeared. On the back of the photograph, someone had written, "She tried to leave twice." Delaney felt coldness spread through his chest. Because if the photograph was authentic, then nearly everything investigators believed about Kathleen's disappearance was wrong, and the truth might be far more horrifying than murder. 3 days later, Delaney discovered something hidden beneath the photographs. A small brass key. Attached to it was a faded tag containing an address in El Paso, Texas. The storage facility sat near an abandoned highway surrounded by empty desert. Dust rolled across the pavement as Delaney arrived. The manager explained the unit had been anonymously paid for since the mid-1990s. Nobody remembered who rented it. When Delaney finally opened the door, stale air spilled into the hallway. The unit looked untouched for years. Inside were stacks of old newspapers, women's clothing, boxes filled with photographs, cassette tapes, medical supplies, and in the far corner sat a yellow envelope labeled "Do Not Play." Most detectives would have waited for forensic teams. Delaney did not. He inserted the tape into an old recorder sitting inside his truck. At first there was only static, then breathing, a woman crying softly, and finally Robert's voice. She kept crying. Pause. I told her to stop. Another pause. She wouldn't stop. Delaney's hands tightened around the recorder. Then another voice entered the tape. Female, terrified. Robert, please. The detective closed his eyes. Even after decades working homicide, he had never heard fear sound so real. Then came a loud crash, silence, and one final whisper, "Look what you made me do." The tape ended. For 40 years, there had been no body, no confession, no murder weapon. Now investigators possessed something worse, a moment, a living nightmare trapped on tape. News of the tape spread quietly through investigative circles. That was when journalist Elena Ruiz became obsessed with the case. Unlike television personalities chasing headlines, Elena focused on victims, especially women erased by powerful men. The deeper she investigated Kathleen's disappearance, the more disturbing the story became. Former co-workers remembered Kathleen arriving at shifts emotionally drained. Friends described her fear. One bartender recalled Kathleen locking herself inside a bathroom after Robert screamed at her during an argument. She looked terrified, the bartender later told Elena. Not embarrassed, terrified. Then Elena uncovered financial records investigators had somehow overlooked decades earlier. A hidden bank account, opened under a false identity. Strangely, withdrawals continued for almost 2 years after Kathleen officially vanished. Someone had been accessing the money. The discovery changed everything. Because it raised a horrifying possibility. What if Kathleen survived the night investigators believed she died? And if she survived, where had she been? The final clue led investigators to New Mexico. Specifically, a decaying property outside a town ominously named Truth or Consequences. Neighbors described an older wealthy man occasionally visiting the house throughout the 1980s. Always alone, always at night. The building appeared abandoned. Dust covered the windows. Dead insects littered the floor. But inside, investigators discovered signs someone once lived there for a very long time. Canned food, medication, old blankets. Then they found the basement. The smell hit them first. Rot, mold, something ancient and wrong. A rusted hospital bed sat bolted to the concrete floor. Nearby, Elena noticed deep scratches carved into the wall, hundreds of tiny marks, like someone counting days or years. And then she saw the message. 3 words carved into concrete, "He said sorry." No one spoke for several seconds. The room itself felt haunted, not by ghosts, by suffering. Then forensic teams made the discovery that shattered the investigation. Hair recovered from the basement matched Kathleen McCormick Durst. The impossible suddenly became possible. Kathleen had been there, alive. Long after the world believed she disappeared forever. The revelation horrified the country. For decades, most people assumed Kathleen had been murdered immediately. But investigators now considered another possibility, a darker one. That Robert Durst may have hidden Kathleen away for years, controlling her, silencing her, keeping her existence secret while the world moved on. And then came another twist. Investigators re-examined old recordings from the Jinx documentary. One sentence suddenly sounded different. Not, "killed them all," of course, but perhaps, "killed them all eventually." The reinterpretation spread rapidly online. Forums exploded with theories. Had Robert slowly murdered multiple people over decades? Had someone helped him? Was Kathleen still alive somewhere even longer than investigators believed? Then Elena received the phone call. It came just before midnight, blocked number, weak signal. An elderly female voice whispered, "You need to stop digging." Elena sat upright. "Who is this?" Long silence. Then the woman whispered something that made Elena's blood turn cold. He wasn't alone. The line crackled violently. Elena grabbed her notebook. "What do you mean? Who helped him?" Silence. Then one final sentence. "There's another tape." The call disconnected. Police traced the signal within minutes. The location stunned everyone. The call came from a payphone less than 2 miles from the desert house. When officers arrived, the phone booth was empty. Coins littered the ground. The receiver swung slowly in the wind. But one thing remained inside: a small cassette tape, labeled in faded black ink, "Play after my death." And beneath those words, another sentence written in handwriting Elena instantly recognized from Robert Durst's old letters. If you're hearing this, she finally remembered. To this day, Kathleen McCormick Durst's body has never officially been found. Some investigators believe Robert murdered her shortly after her disappearance. Others believe she survived for years in secret. And a few still fear the full truth has never surfaced. Because throughout every stage of the case, one detail remained disturbingly consistent. Evidence disappeared. Witnesses changed stories. People became afraid, as though an invisible force kept protecting Robert Durst long after suspicion surrounded him. But perhaps the most terrifying part of the story was never the murders themselves. It was the realization that someone capable of unimaginable darkness could still appear completely ordinary, quiet, polite, rich. A man sitting calmly across from interviewers while carrying decades of violence inside him. And somewhere out there, there may still be another tape waiting to be heard. One final recording, one final truth, and perhaps one final victim nobody has discovered yet. If you enjoyed this investigation from Dark History Classified, kindly like and subscribe for more dark mysteries, hidden histories, and true crime stories lurking beneath the surface.